The Joe Show.
Woo!
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Joe Show podcast. And today I'm going to dial it back all the way back to the beginning of how this whole ministry got started, how Joe Amaral kind of got out there and how I got to be able to do all the things that I've been a part of over these past 20 years and, how I got to where I'm doing today, all that kind of stuff. I've noticed on all my social media platforms, there's been a lot of new people, which is really cool. And so not everybody knows about the beginning. Everybody knows where I am today and what I'm doing. But how did I get here and how did it all happen? So I thought it would be cool just to take one episode and devote it to, to my history of how I got to do what I'm doing today. And, I was reading in Zechariah 4:10, it says, despise not small beginnings. Everybody wants the big ministry. They want their name and lights. They want to have a certain amount of, followers on, Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is. And I'm thankful for everybody who's been tracking with me for 20 years, if you can believe it. But it wasn't always that way. I was part of pastoring, little churches here in Ontario, loving the people, loving the community. But I think it's important to tell people about your journey. I wrote a book called Get Off Your Ash. And one of the chapters was called Don't Covet Your Neighbor's Ash, and the ash represents the experiences that you go through. And sometimes you look at a person, on YouTube or on social media and say, wow, look at how, big their ministry or business is. They're so lucky. They got it all. And it's like, hang on a second, don't covet the process. There's usually a story behind how anybody got to where they are today. You look at any celebrity, any musician, athlete, whatever, there's a journey. I mean, very few things happen overnight. There's a process, and I have a process. And so I thought I would talk about how I ended up going to Israel in the first place, way back in November of 2002, and how that trip opened up the door for me to do what I'm doing today. And what's today? Today's January 18th, and it's Wednesday. And Karen and I just got back from Israel on Friday, 5 days ago. We were just in Jerusalem last week. And I was there for my 46th trip, and that's almost impossible to believe. 46 times in 20 years. You do the math and you can figure out how many times a year I was going. And because of the pandemic, we hadn't been back for a few years, and I didn't know what was happening, and there was so much going on with what we're doing in Liberia and Africa, and I didn't know where Israel was fitting into everything, and all the time that we had invested in doing that and kind of trying to figure out where's that all going. But I have to say it was really good to be back in the land. To be in the Galilee, in Tiberias. It was awesome walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee again. I forgot how peaceful and how good that was for my soul. And even though Jerusalem is crazy, it's chaotic, it's got traffic, and everybody's trying to sell you something. But walking through the old city, and going down to the Western Wall and just being there again, it was good for my soul. And I thought, as 2023 starts, and everybody's always optimistic about the new year, right? Oh, this is going to be the best year yet, and I'm hoping that it is, but I'm also very pragmatic, and I'm like, I want to be very intentional in 2023. I've been doing this for a long time now, and I've made my share of mistakes, and I openly admit when I have failed. Usually when I fail spectacularly, because that's how I do it. I believe in going big or going home. I would always rather try something and fail at it and say, okay, I'm awful at that. I'm never going to do that again. People are so afraid to fail, but that's where we learn. I was talking to a friend of mine who has, really big and successful business in Israel and different parts around the world. And he was saying in Israel, it's not like a law or anything, but it's common knowledge around, the big Fortune 500 companies that you don't invest in anyone who has an idea, who brings you a business plan, unless they have failed at least 2 times, maybe even 3. Did you hear that? They won't even look at you. They don't even want to think about investing in you unless you have failed 2 or 3 times. Why? Because they know that you have learned along the way and that you're probably in a much better place now to launch the new business. And so that's kind of how I feel. Over 20 years, I've made some mistakes, and a lot of them were public. You can go watch them on YouTube. They're out there forever, but that's okay. The whole process has made me who I am. Our lives, we are the sum total of all our experiences, the good and the bad. In that book I mentioned, Get Off Your Ash, I talk about our lives being like a delicate, a recipe, and everything gets added to the recipe, adds flavor and brings something out of the meal, even the sour stuff, not just the sweet stuff. And so I've never minded trying new things. People said you started in Israel, and then you were on TV, and then you were teaching pastor in a church, and then you went to Africa, and now you're back to Israel, and then you're doing this. How come? Well, because I don't mind saying yes to God. I'm not a yes man to men, but I'm a yes man to God. And I've never been afraid to try something new. I've never had an issue with giving up what people perceive to be a position of prominence or importance. If God is calling me, bye. I'm gone. I'm happy to do it. And I love where I am, and I love what I'm doing. And so let's go back to that Zechariah verse, to not despise small beginnings. I'll never forget the first time I went to Israel. It was November 2002, and it was a really scary time because there was something going on called the Intifada, and that was known as the Palestinian Uprising. And there was, 3, 4, 5 suicide bombings a week in Jerusalem. And it was scary. Restaurants were blowing up, buses were exploding, people were detonating in public areas, and it was a difficult time. And someone who I knew said to me, "I really think you're supposed to go to Israel." And I remember having no desire to go. I often ask people when I'm speaking somewhere, hey, who would like to go to Israel? And lots of people raise their hand. And I've always said in 2002, I wouldn't have raised my hand. There's no way I wanted to go, especially given the political, climate and the turmoil that was going on in the country. But of course, I'm so glad I said yes to God and to this person who, quite frankly, kept badgering me, saying, "You need to go, you need to go, you need to go." And I remember at the time thinking in my mind, "You need to go bug somebody else, because there's no way I'm going." And I just finished pastoring, at a small church, and we had no income. There was no money in the bank. And at that time, even 20 years ago, it was like $5,000 to go to Israel. And I said, "Hey, I can't afford to go." And this person said, "Done." I said, "What's done?" "We're going to cover your costs. We're going to send you on a private tour to Israel." And I remember kind of being shocked, going, "Oh, no." I kind of thought I had it out, because I thought there's no way somebody's going to give me. I mean, this is 20 years ago. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew what I was capable of or what I had in me to give out. And I said, there's no way somebody's going to invest that kind of money in me. But this person did. This couple did. And I'm so thankful that they saw something and they obeyed God, and they invested heavily and sent me over there. And I'll never forget. And I've told this before, so I'm not going to share the entire story of how I got to Israel. But I just remember being there and feeling like a fish out of water. One of those, one of these things is not like the other. That was me. I just felt like I didn't belong. I mean, the world was so foreign to me, and seeing the Orthodox and the religious, and then there was Sabbath and there was kosher. I never knew what a Sabbath elevator was, and all these kinds of things were going on around me. People, walking around carrying prayer books and stuff. And I thought, where in the world am I? And I'll never forget the time my tour guide, because that couple who sent me to go see Israel, they actually also put me in there was 3 other people with me. There was 4 of us on this private tour. And I'll never forget the 4th morning I was there. Like the first 3 days, I was not a happy camper. I was so afraid because, restaurant after restaurant that we were in, we would see, memorials or candles on the wall. And I would say, "Oh, what are those for?" why are there like, 6 candles or 18 candles, whatever it was? And they would say, oh, there was a suicide bombing here and 13 people were killed and every candle represents a life. And I thought, oh my goodness, like it got real, real fast, And I remember going to one place to eat and there was nobody there. And the guy said to me, like the maitre d' said, oh, you're fortunate. We're still open tonight. Yeah, somebody tried to blow us up earlier, but we were able to disarm him. And I'm like, what? Where am I? Where have I come to? And what have I said yes to? What am I doing? And so those first few days, I was living in fear because of what I'd seen on TV and because of what was actually happening. And I remember wanting to come home. You can ask Karen. How old was I? I was 32 years old at the time, and I was sobbing like a baby. Like, I want to come home. I want to come home. I'm so scared. Who in their right mind would want to come to this country? And who would come back a second time, let alone a third time? I'm never coming back. This is like the one shot. So God, if you got something, you better do it now, because I ain't never coming back to this place. And is that real enough for you? That was what I was actually sensing in my heart the whole time I was there. But I'm glad I didn't come home. I remember after the phone call with Karen, this is way before cell phones and texting and all that kind of stuff. It was difficult to make the phone call, but she was crying and she was saying, if you want to come home, come home. And I was considering, going to the airport and finding out if I could change my flight and all that kind of stuff. And then the fourth morning that I was there was a knock on my door. And I went, and this, kind of burly guy, he starts off, he's all excited. He's like, Shalom, Boker Tov, Manishma. He's speaking Hebrew. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You need to just calm down. I am not ready for this. It's early. I don't know what we're doing. And he said, oh, I'm your tour guide. My name is Aryeh Bar David. I'm like, oh, wow. I said, does that mean anything in Hebrew in your language? And he said, oh, it means the lion from the tribe of Judah. I thought, oh, man, that's a name. And he said, what's your name? And I said, Joe of Toronto. It didn't have the same oomph that his name had. So Aryeh said, get your Bibles and we're going to go and we're going to start following, the footsteps of Yeshua. And I went, Yahuwah? Maybe I'm still jet lagged. It's only been 3 days. This poor guy, he doesn't even know how to say Jesus' name. I remember honestly thinking that, and it's so ashamed of it now. But at the time, I thought, oh, they don't even know how to say his name here. And he kept talking about Yeshua as we would, drive by Jericho. We were down in the Judean desert going up to the Galilee and, all over Jerusalem. He kept saying, oh, Yeshua did this and Yeshua did that. And I remember saying, Aryeh, I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about, but you're saying his name really weird. And he said, whose name? I said, Jesus. And he said, Jesus? Oh, yes, you're from Canada, right? That side where America is. I said, yeah. And he said, oh, that's what you call him over there. I said, what do you mean that's what we call him? That's the guy, that's his name. The angel appeared to his mother, Mary, and said, call him Jesus. And he said, no, his mother's name was Miriam. I'm like, what's wrong with your throat? Miriam. And the angel said, and you shall call him Yeshua, which means to save, because he's going to save his people. And, to make a very long and entertaining story shorter and slightly less entertaining, I remember being on Mount Zion. That's where it was. And from there, we were coming down through the Kidron Valley, and we got up to the Mount of Olives. And I remember looking down at the old city, and, and just seeing there was, there's the Absalom's tomb, the Zacharias tomb, the Kidron Valley, the Mount of Olives, where all the old olive gardens used to be. And right over there, you can see the house of Caiaphas, where Jesus went and he was arrested. You could see the upper room. You could see the ruins of the fortress of Pilate, and part of the palace where King Herod used to come to during the high holy days. And I remember looking at it all and having one of those, oh my goodness, holy smokes kind of moments. And it's right in the beginning of another book I wrote called Understanding Jesus. And I tell this story there if you kind of want to go back and check out some of the other references. I remember turning to him and saying, Jesus was a Jew. we both went quiet. I'd gone to seminary. I'd been pastoring for a long time, and wow, he wasn't a Christian. Like, he didn't go to church. He didn't read the New Testament. His name's not Jesus. Nobody spoke English in the first century. And I remember going, whoa, 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 what is going on? How can I have been a follower of this Messiah, of Jesus, and I don't really even know him? And that was a real turning point in my life. I didn't realize how big of a turning point it was, but it turned out to be a moment that defined. It was very definitive in what I would become and what I would do. And then before we left, we were up in the mid part of the country in a place called Mount Carmel. And I know that's a name that we know because of the story of the prophet Elijah, where he confronts all the false prophets of Baal. And how long will we waver between two gods? Let's have a showdown. Let's call out to our gods, and whoever answers by fire, he is the Lord. And they're like, cool, let's do that. And we all know what happens. God answers by fire, consumes the water, consumes the bull. All the false prophets are killed. And all this is just like, I'm standing there trying to take it in. Like, this happened like here, like 50 feet from where I'm standing. Then they went down the side of this hill down to this river. I think it's called the Kishon River. And that's where they were all put. And where the river is, it's in the valley that we call Armageddon, Har Megiddo, the valley of, or the mountain of Armageddon. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like, so much has happened here. So much is going to happen here. And I felt God speak to me. Don't worry, I'm not one of those guys who thinks God goes around just with a British accent talking to people. But in my heart, I felt like he had spoken to me. And it was this, if you want to understand me, do you want to understand me? Yeah, yes, God, I want to understand you. Well, if you want to understand me, then you've got to understand this land and the people who live in it. And that was it. That was the big turning point. And I said, okay, I'm going to study this land. I'm going to study the geography. I'm going to study its history. I'm going to learn about its people, its culture, its religion. And when I came back home to Canada and I began to study, that was it. There was no turning back for me. And from that moment on, this is what I've been doing. So that was November 2002, and now we're into 2023. So just over 20 years I've been doing this. And it's taken me all around the world several times. I've been all across Southeast Asia. I've been in, places like Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, China itself. I've been in England. I've been in Italy, Australia. I don't know how many states and provinces I've been in, but all this because of that small beginning, that being willing to say yes, to get way outside my comfort zone, to go to a place I did not understand, I did not know. But because I said yes, because I was willing to become uncomfortable and get out of the place where I was, to get away from that familiarity and just to say yes to whatever it was that God was doing, everything changed. And so that's how I got into teaching about the Hebraic roots. And from that, I was able to launch a weekly television program in 2005. I had no TV experience. I had been a guest maybe 6 months before that on something called the Miracle Channel here in Canada. And they invited me to be a guest on the show. And apparently it went well. And remember the host saying, hey, you're good at this. You're a natural. I said, oh, really? And I fell in love with that red light on the camera, because I knew on the other side of that lens, there was 100 people, 1,000 people, 100,000 people, 1,000,000 people watching. And I remember thinking, man, I could spend the rest of my life crisscrossing the planet. And in one half-hour show, I'll reach more people than no matter how long I've been traveling. And so I remember starting to make plans to do that. And again, to make a very long story short, the Israeli government and the Ministry of Tourism got together and met with me because they heard about my passion and they had heard my story. And I pitched them the idea of launching a television program. I said, if we could show Israel in its true light, in a positive light, and show people the places of the Bible, I'm sure Christians would want to go there. And the Ministry of Tourism said, yeah, that's awesome. Like, what do we need to do? And I said, well, I'm going to be talking about Jesus. And they said, that's okay. As long as you send them to Israel, we're cool. And so from 2005 to 2015, we had this TV show, and that would take me to Israel multiple times, every year. And had a lot of fun, doing the program. I got to do a lot of really, really cool things. In fact, over this next year, if you head over to the YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, Joe Amaral, and make sure you subscribe, hit that little bell icon so you get notified of new videos. I'm going to be posting some of my favorite clips from the 10 years of doing the show. I mean, they're never going to see the light of day again because I'm no longer there, and so I thought, hey, let me throw it on YouTube and get a little more mileage out of it. So you can go over and check that out. But in 2015, I began to experience just symptoms in my body. I knew something wasn't right. And I know we're just 20 minutes over into this podcast, and it's not about getting dark, but it's about being real. And I need to just share a little bit, something that's sensitive. So if there's little ears, please, make sure they're not watching or listening, or just kind of, warn them. But I began to experience changes in my body, and there was a lot of pain. I had like shaking I couldn't control. I couldn't sleep. I had anxiety. I had mood swings, just, fits of rage that it's not me. It's not who I am. I'm not perfect, but I'm definitely not that guy. And I remember even my wife, Karen, she was like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? Like, you're not the same person. Like, what's going on? And I didn't want to say anything at first because I was starting to have like these little flashes of stuff that happened to me as a little boy. And I was too ashamed to admit or to even consider that had actually happened to me, that I was sexually abused by a man as a young boy. And it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it any longer. My body was screaming at me like, you better do something, or, I'm going to shut down on you. And I really felt like I was going to die. I got really, really sick. And I remember flying to speak at a conference, and I just started to read this book that I would recommend for any guy who's a survivor of male childhood sexual abuse. It's called Not Quite Healed. And as I was reading through the book at 30,000 feet, it just triggered everything. All of a sudden, all the memories came back to me, as vivid as they could be. And that was on a Saturday night, and I had to get up and preach 2 big services the Sunday morning. And somehow, by the grace of God, you just, you get through it, you do what you got to do. And when I got back home, I just began to share everything with Karen and talk about all the memories I was having and beginning to understand what I was going through. And at that time in my life, I knew that the Israel ministry that I was with, it had come to an end. I just was not mentally, I wasn't spiritually in the position to be able to lead such an important ministry. And I knew that I had to resign. I knew I had to step down. Nothing happened. Nothing even got close to happening. But I just knew that inside, I needed to take some time to heal, to deal with what happened to me, and to be able to come out stronger on the other side. And as difficult as it was, I poured my heart and soul into that thing. I spent countless days on the road. I don't know how many flights I took. I was doing sometimes 9, 10, even 11 countries in a single year, sacrificing time away from my wife, from my children, from the comfort of my home, my friends, my culture. But I did it because I believed so much in helping believers to understand the roots of the faith. And I just wanted to get out there, and I had to ask the question, am I prepared to walk away from all of this? And the answer was, yeah, I am. It's not about the money. It's not about the prestige. It's not about the position or anything like that. I've got to get myself healed. I've got to get myself right so that I can be able to move forward. And I'm so glad that I did it. Like I said, as difficult as it was, financially, reputation-wise, everybody knew me as that guy, and all of a sudden I was gone. But I knew I had to do it. And so I guess at this point in the podcast, I want to speak to those who have been through situations. Hopefully it's not like mine. I'm hoping you didn't go, through what I went through, but we all have journeys. And if you have to make a decision between your job and your health, between, a promotion and your health, between making more money and your health, choose your health every single time, because you can always make money. You can always get another job, but you're not going to have another life. This is the one opportunity. So take the time to get right, to get better, even though it might be difficult in that moment, and people might not even understand. They might say, why did you leave? You were doing so well, and you're perfect for this, and blah, blah, blah. Again, don't covet your neighbor's ash. You don't know what my process is. I don't know what your experience is. Nobody knows what you know. And so put your health first, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, spiritual health. All of that has to come first, because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. If that's off, everything's off. And so in 2016, I decided to step down, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And at that time, I had been doing some guest hosting with 100 Huntley Street, which is an awesome ministry here in Canada. And it's the longest running daily TV show in the history of our country. And I had been on as a guest, and as a guest co-host, and then as part of a ensemble for many years. Then they offered me the position to become the lead host of the show with some really incredible people by my side. And so I stepped into that. And at the same time, a large church in the Toronto area said, hey, we'd love to have you on staff as our teaching pastor. And so I said, oh, that's kind of a really cool opportunity. I get to teach, but in the same place. I don't have to get on a plane and leave my family and leave my home. And so I did those for a while. And, I'm very thankful for the experience, but, the draw of the road was coming back to me. And I knew that I wasn't meant to be just in one place. And so I walked away from a very lucrative, position or positions. Both of them were paid very well, and they took care of me, and they were sweet. And I have nothing but great memories of being there. But I knew that God was calling me to do something more difficult, and I said, Lord, it's not that this is easy, but am I relying on my own abilities, on my own skills here? And I remember I said this crazy prayer, and sometimes I've regretted it because it was a hard prayer. But I said, God, whatever I do next, give me a ministry that I can't do without you. Let it be something that when people look at it, they're like, there's no way Joe did that. I mean, he's good, but there's just no way he did that. And little did I know that a pastor from Liberia would be reaching out to me. And maybe you're doing what I'm doing. You're Googling right now, Liberia. Where in the world is that? It's in West Africa, a small little country on the southwestern part of the West Coast. And there's a whole podcast already out there and YouTube videos. You can go watch, and learn about the whole call to Liberia. But the prayer was, give me something I can't do without you. And I'm telling you, I've learned over these past 3 years of being in Liberia, you can't do ministry there without God. The roadblocks, the challenges, the difficulties are more than anything I've ever experienced in my life. And it's when you go through those difficult times, when you feel like you just, smack up against the wall. You're like, ow, that really hurt. Why am I here? It's in those moments that you dig deep and you go back and you say, I know that God called me here. I know that I know that I know he said, go. I said that prayer. I uttered those words. He honored it. He sent me there. And I said, Lord, I can't do this. I need you. And I cannot tell you how many times, time and time again, God has come through, and he's done the impossible in an impossible place under impossible situations, but God has done it. So 2 things: head over to either joeamaral.org to look at the stuff I've done in Israel. Links to my YouTube channel and TV shows are there, episodes, teachings, all that kind of stuff. The books I've written, all that's there. And then you can also head over to hopeforliberia.com. And there you can find out what we're doing there in this great little African country. Let me get let's see, there it is. This is the flag of Liberia, not the United States. It's only got 1 star. That's the flag of Liberia. And then there's my wonderful little picture of Africa that my daughter painted for me. And God has given me a real burden on heart for that nation. So go to hopeforliberia.com and find out what we're doing there. In 3 years, we've been able to buy property, build a church and community center, build a school. We bought a farm. We're about to plant the seeds. We're building an orphanage as we speak. We have chickens, all the rest of it. But all this comes from small beginnings. So when you look at me today and you look at the ministry and you see this, the reach that I've been able to accumulate over these past 20 years, it wasn't there. Nobody gives it to you. You got to work for it. You got to get out of your comfort zone and say, I will do this. I will get off my ash, as the book says. And that's another one. You can go to getoffyourash.today and read about that book and find out what that's all about. But you have to be willing to say yes. You have to be willing to become uncomfortable, because it's in that uncomfortableness, at least in my life, that's what I found, that's where God meets you. That's where the miraculous happens. That's where the crazy happens. That's where the great happens. So I hope in this little half-hour podcast that you've taken something from my journey that will encourage you, that will motivate you to want to say yes. I'm not talking about leaving a good job for the sake of leaving a good job. It's not that, or, quit your position or your ministry. No. If you're happy where you are and that's where God has you, you stay and you be faithful and God will bless you. But at the same time, if you're feeling that nudge out the door, if you're feeling that push towards something different, even if it's uncomfortable, and even if you don't have it all figured out, so many times I felt like, a boat in the middle of the ocean. Hey, I'm safe in my boat. I have enough money to live. I have, a home with a roof over my head. I'm floating. I'm okay. But you learn after a while that, existing isn't enough. Just, hanging on and for another day, that's not enough. And so I've often said, Lord, I don't need the full plan, but just give me a direction. That way. Oh, okay, I'm going to start paddling that way. And on the way, when you start to make that journey, when you get out of the boat like Peter did, when you start to say yes and become uncomfortable, then things become a little more clear. You get a little bit of direction, a little bit of direction, a little more step, and before you know it, the picture starts to come together. So again, I'm hoping that there's something I said today that has encouraged you, that maybe will motivate you. And don't worry. Don't get lost in the weeds and overthink things. Think things through. Be smart, be intelligent, be wise. But at the same time, be willing to step out, even if you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. As long as the framework is there, God will help you fill in the pieces of the puzzle. And before you know it, the picture will be complete. Well, that's it, my friends. I just wanted to share my journey of humble beginnings. And I'm so excited and so thankful for everything that I've been through, the good and the bad, because it's made me who I am. And so whatever it is that He's called you to do, be bold, be brave, believe that God is with you every step of the way. The Joe Show.